So now we're ready to paint. You will need your palette that you packed at Co-op today, and we squirted some paint in the trays. I've prepped one color, but you'll need to prep them by just adding water. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can take your brush and just drip, clean water into the pot, the little vessel. You can grab a bigger brush and do the same thing. Sometimes that's faster. Or you can also grab the little sea sponge I got you, get that wet. Oh, it kind of needs some moisten, and you can just go ahead and, that's probably the most efficient way. So that's one way to do it, okay? Plus you've prepped your sponge for later. Okay, I want to make sure that you have some sort of clean paper towel so that you can dry your brush out. And then go ahead and mix the paint in. So you have red and yellow, hopefully. The colors don't really read right on the video. This is looking rather, I don't know, red-orangish. Sorry about that. I don't know there's much I can do. Anyway, you'll test. Remember we talked about this. You clean your brush between. Turn them over a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to begin by mixing my colors. I'm just going to grab a little bit of yellow and move it over. I'm going to use yellow as my base. And then I'll clean my brush off. Grab red and blend it in and see if I like that. Ooh, I really like that. I think I'm ready. Okay, that was quick. And then I'll go ahead and paint in my wedges. Now, when you go ahead and you paint in your wedges, you're going to notice hopefully a couple things. First of all, if you have a lot of paint, it's going to be darker. You can go ahead and let that just dry in a puddle and it will be darker there. See how it's going to be darker in that one little spot? In the other side, it's going to be lighter, and you can do that. It makes it more watery looking. Lay that in. You'll also notice, see how where I laid the paint down, it is not moving. That's because I'm painting on dry paper. It will keep that white spot or that white barrier in there as long as the paper's dry and I'm applying wet paint to it. It won't bleed out. It will bubble up, but it won't bleed out, which is really effective. You can use that to your advantage, and that is what we are actually going to practice. Wet on dry is what it's called. Okay, so go ahead and run around and do that. Now, if you find that there's an area and you want it to be a little bit lighter, we showed you in class, but you can take your sponge, make sure it doesn't have a lot of water, it's just moist, it's not dripping, and then you can go ahead and do what's called lifting, and you can just lift that color out and just take it out. But if you lift out, you now have paint on your sponge. When you go to put it back down, it can be a stamp. So just monitor that. You can kind of blot it on your towel and then go ahead and lift some more out. If you don't like it, you want a little bit lighter in there, and you can lift. So it makes a really nice effect. You can control your color that way. Okay, now once it dries, now this portion is completely dry. Once it dries, you can then put paint over it. It will stay where you put it, again, because it's wet on dry. But if it's ever wet paper or wet paint, and I try to put more wet on it, it will bleed. Let me show you that really quick. So I'm going to go ahead and take this one slice I drew for you in the other picture, and I'm going to go ahead and put some water on my slices, okay? So this is kind of I don't want to call it exactly a non-example, because this is actually a technique in watercolor painting. It's called wet on wet. So we're just not going to be practicing wet on wet. We're going to practice wet on dry. But let me show you what wet on wet does. When I go ahead, and I'm going to try to do what I did over here that last time, and I go ahead and I try to control where the color goes in my little slice. Do you see how it just bleeds, it blobs, and it starts being filmy? It's going to spread. I can't control it. I can't control the shape. Now this is really great when you try to do a sky or a lake or water droplets on the ground or whatever. It's a very beautiful effect, but it's not what we want for this project, okay? What we can do though, let's say I made that mistake, I can go ahead and lift that out. Because this is watercolor paper, it actually will allow me to it will release the pigment. I'll go ahead and wash that down, and I can let the paper dry and try it again in an hour or so, okay? So it's not, no harm done. Or move to another orange slice and start painting on that one. So if you find yourself wet on wet, you don't like how it's not controlling, just go ahead and move on over. All right. I also want to talk about really quick, there are different kinds of orange. Your orange, if you notice, like the orange on the outer peel is almost yellowy. It's a yellow orange. This is more of a deep orange, right? More of a red orange. So I would like to see you try to control or depict two different kinds of orange. So I'll go ahead, I'll finish in these slices, and I'm rushing it. And then I'll go ahead and again, where you put more pigment or more paint, it's just going to be darker, and it's going to dry darker. And if it's not dark enough, you can actually let it dry and then go ahead and put another layer on. Let me show you that. This again was what we did in class today, so I can go over and just make it darker by adding on another layer. And it will intensify that hue. And notice it is wet on dry, so it's going to stay where I put it, even though I had painted it before, but because it's wet, it's just not going to move. Now, let's say that and of course, hold on, let me make my other paint. My other orange, I'll start with yellow again. This brush is really small, so it doesn't mix paint as fast, and I'm just going to grab a little bit of orange. So I have a really light yellowy orange, and then I can go ahead and put in that peel on the edge. If you have a lemon, because remember in class I'm going to grab a little more. I'm going to mix on the paper. See, this is very yellowy, and I think I'd like it a little darker orange, so I'm just going to go ahead and lay that in and mix it on the paper. And I'm going to my peel is uneven, right? So I'm just going to kind of pull. Peel isn't completely a straight line. I could come in and pull. The other thing I could do is this is an idea, you could paint all your pieces in here, let them dry, and then go ahead and let me do it over here. Of course, this is wet, I gotta pay attention, right? I could go ahead and put wet water down here. I could go ahead and grab my other orange on that peel and try wet on wet. That would actually look pretty cool. And just do the edge, and then see, it blobbed, but I can always lift it out, right? Put that edge in with wet on wet, and it would get misty in here. And then if it's just starting to get out of control, I could go ahead and lift it out a little bit, and it might give me, yeah, it does. It would give me that kind of misty look, that the edge has a hard edge where it would be dry paper, wet on dry. You've got that hard edge, and then it's a little bit it's wet, so it's going to cause that bleeding in here, make it look a little bit more like the peel. You could try that, or go ahead if you're like, well, I don't get what you're talking about, just don't worry about it. Just go ahead, try to make a lighter orange. If that's what my orange peel is making a lighter orange, go ahead and make a lighter orange than the one in the center, and then just go ahead and paint it in. So paint that in. If you'd like, also, you notice that you're like, it's almost yellowy. If your orange has a little bit of more of a yellowy peel than a white peel, you could let the whole thing dry and then go in a little bit with some yellow and then just kind of lightly yellow it up a little bit if you want it to be yellowy. You don't want the bright white. You could go ahead and do that, okay? So play with it. The neat thing that you're doing in this exercise, I just think it's great, is that you're controlling the colors that we've been given. You're actually taking two primary colors. You're taking red and yellow. You're having to control red and yellow. And you're having to control them by making an orange and then making a yellow orange. And if you see that there are darker parts, you know, you just make it a little bit red there. And if you think it's more light, you can do it either by lifting or adding a little more yellow. So play around with those variables and let it dry and bring it back next week. Okay, thanks so much.